Hi, I'm Jane. Nice to meet you.
Well, it is. Yeah, that's really sad.
You're not.
Yeah. No, well, we'll talk about it here, but it is bad. You know, we're not making decisions that need to be made. I mean, it's such a contrast with the Vermont legislature. Hi.
Hi, Chris Chapman. Well, years ago, not earlier when I was looking, lobbying on a little law, trustee level.
Is that right? Did we take care of it?
Yeah, and then it passed the Vermont Trust Code. And pending now is uniform principal income, all nice big package of fiduciary reform for a lot of West Vermont.
It's like a town meeting. I want to thank everybody for coming. Where's Dora? Right here. Come on up. I wanted, here's what we'll do. I wanted to start out talking a little bit about money and politics, what Dora's doing and what you all are doing down in Brattleboro. And then give a report from all the great capital city of Washington, D.C. And we'll talk about all the stuff that's not getting done there that should be getting done. But one of the things that is a real problem, as you guys know, is money in politics. It has just gone totally haywire. It's been bad, but it's gotten worse with the Citizens United case. And, you know, the Supreme Court seems to get this question of who is a person wrong. And if you remember, the U.S. Supreme Court back in the 1850s decided African Americans were not persons, right? And now in 2010, I think it is, they decided corporations are. And it makes no sense whatsoever. And we're seeing what's happening right now in the Republican presidential primary, where vast amounts of corporate money and money from extraordinarily wealthy people is dominating the political process. And it is poison to democracy. And you know, my view is that a lot of the folks who were in the Tea Party and a lot of the folks who were part of the 99% movement understand something that's true, and that is the economy and the government is not working for the majority of the American people. And one of the reasons is because of this influx of enormous amount of money. I'm doing two things. You know, we've got to have a constitutional amendment at the end of the day, because the court made its decision in Citizens United on constitutional grounds and basically said corporations are people that can spend whatever they want. They've opened it up to these super PACs. And with a ruling being on a constitutional basis, either a new Supreme Court has to reverse it or we have to pass a constitutional amendment basically restoring democracy to the people. But in the meantime, there's a couple of things that I'm doing. I'm going to go back on Monday and get support from my colleagues to do two things. Number one, to get the IRS to enforce the Internal Revenue Service laws. We have got a lot of nonprofit organizations, really political organizations, masquerading as nonprofits. Crossroads GPS is an example. The Karl Rove-inspired group gets millions of dollars, over $20 million, gets it under a 501c4 exemption as though it's a social service organization when 99% of its money is used in political attack ads. It's a political organization. It is not entitled to a tax-exempt status. So the letter that I'm going to be circulating with my colleagues is calling on the IRS to do its job. Don't give a tax-exempt status to what is essentially a political organization. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to make the Federal Election Commission do its job as well. And right now, because of the unwillingness of the Senate to proceed on appointments that are presented to it by President Obama, there's total gridlock. 5 of the 6 members do not have permanent appointments. And we're going to send a letter to the President, colleagues of mine, saying, look, Mr. President, the Senate won't act, you act. Use your recess appointment authority, get those people doing their job so that we can enforce the laws that we do have. So we've got to fight back. Now, I want to introduce Dora, who's doing great work here in Brattleboro to just talk about the ballot issue that folks here are going to be able to take up at town meeting. And I just want to say that it's the grassroots reaction that ultimately makes a difference, I hope, in Washington. I mean, we've got to fight big money with people power, and that's what Dora's doing. So why don't you say a few words about that?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. In Brattleboro, on our town meeting ballot, we have initiative, a resolution that, just to read it, the one line that is actually it calls on our delegation to initiate and support such legislative action as may be appropriate to regulate corporate spending on political campaigns. This actually came from a citizen that came to the select board. And the original, I just want to speak to the issue of the amendment, because the original language included language about corporate personhood. And we had a lengthy discussion among the select board on that. And issues came up about the rights of corporations to incorporate and years of legal precedent. And I think that discussion in the select board is going to be a microcosm of the debate that's going to surround the later debate on the constitutional amendment from a national political perspective. Even among our select board, it was difficult to come up with. I myself have been working on the issue of corporate personhood for years in support of constitutional amendment, and I'm thrilled that you're working on this. And I read your initiatives. John sent them to me, and I think it's a good step in the right direction to begin addressing the issue of corporate spending in political campaigns.
Well, thank you. First of all, I applaud your work. And a lot of good things that have happened started at town meetings. Remember the nuclear freeze? That started in the 80s. It's really quite important for citizens to get involved. Also, this question of the corporate personhood. Corporations do good things, right? They organize capital, they organize work, they create jobs. So that's fine. But what you don't want corporations to be allowed to do is write a multi-million-dollar check and drown out the voice of you and me. That's really what it boils down to. And by the way, we haven't had corporate direct spending in campaigns for over 100 years. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was the champion of this, a Republican. Okay, so it's like how this decision 5-4 got decided. It turned 100 years of history upside down. Only the minds of those 5 Supreme Court justices will tell us. But we're seeing what's happening. I mean, we are not on the Republican presidential primary roadmap. If we were, the only thing we'd be watching on TV would be pretty mean-spirited ads attacking one attacking another. And it's so bizarre that some of these individuals, the billionaires, are writing checks to 3 of the 4 candidates. They're writing them for Santorum, for Romney, and Gingrich, and the money in each case is being used to attack the other. So this is a real problem. I really appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you.
But why don't I stop and open it up for questions? But we've got the town manager here, and I know you've got to go, so maybe you can start.
Actually, another question is to let you know that a regional group here has been working on the Southeastern Vermont Economic Development Strategies group. We have an application right now into EDA for funding to help create SEDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, which once that's done, it will help us with other grant initiatives through EDA. And I just feel that it's important for the our people in D.C. to know that's going on, because it can be very helpful to us when we do some of those national applications, and particularly with the EDA. I think you were painfully aware that that Brattleboro and really all of this county has suffered some pretty huge losses over the last year. We're still looking across at a large building that is really struggling to find the funds to rebuild. And so I just wanted to let you know that these actions are being taken. The board just recently had an update on this, and I think that you'll be hearing more from us on that.
Well, I want to hear more, and I really appreciate the work that you and the board is doing. And one of the things that I find actually kind of gut-wrenching, I'll be in Washington and then come back here, and the reality is that people in our community are doing an awful lot with very little, trying to keep things going. And the budget politics down in Washington is taking money away from things like economic development or the community development block grants, where that money relies on local people who have an outsized commitment to their community and are willing to put in an awful lot of volunteer time, work for less than minimum wage sometimes, to do something that's going to have some lasting benefit in the community. And it's a really good investment of money. And, community development block grant, just similar to the EDA, in the budget it's going to go from $4 billion to $3 billion to be spread out around the whole country. And, we've got to save money. We've got to pay our bills. But you know what? You've got to be somewhat prudent, too, and wise about where you do and don't spend money. And in your communities where you're relying on local leadership that's proven itself, local citizens that have demonstrated their willingness to help, your tax dollars should come back from Washington to our communities to help you be successful. So thanks for all you're doing, but I think that is a top priority that we should have. Yes?
First of all, I want to thank you for your work on the corn lobbyists and the oil lobbyists in making ethanol the government not supporting ethanol. You were successful in that, and that was absolutely wonderful. But now we find what's happening is the ethanol price is going up, and so is our gasoline. So the oil companies have found a way to do that, to raise the prices on us again. And Vermont is very concerned about environment, and it's also concerned about economics.
Right.
And some of these large companies are oil companies that you're talking about.
Right.
But we in Vermont meet the specifications from the federal government to switch over to methanol mostly in our gasoline. And we have the technology in Vermont to make the methanol just as strong or stronger than gasoline. So we have a chance to do this. And I don't know how to approach this subject. I've tried to approach it to the different offices here, but it's available to use methanol here, and
that's clean.
Everything, yeah.
Right.
So I just.
Right, well, thank you.
But
I am glad on ethanol. Ethanol was unbelievable. They had the trifecta. Ethanol got a 50 cent a gallon subsidy. It got a 40+ cent tariff barrier that was imposed on imports, and it had a mandate that required that you buy ethanol. And I got pretty blue about it when it wrecked my chainsaw. I forgot to drain it over the winter. I'll tell you, that made me mad. Yes.
My name's Susan Miyake. I live in Guilford, but half of the
Can
year.
people hear you?
Sorry, half of the year I live in Tochigi Prefecture in Japan, about 100 miles south of Fukushima. And now we're approaching the March 11th anniversary. Wow. Excuse me if I get emotional, but I'm close enough that we're hosting nuclear refugees in our area, and I'm seeing kind of firsthand some of the fallout from that. But my major question is, when I've been to Vermont Yankee, and I've never been a nuclear activist before, they've always stressed that the evacuation zone is fairly small. I can't remember exactly, 5, 10, 15
right.
miles. They have told us never to even have to think about even worst case scenario. We don't have to think about anything beyond there. But the instant Fukushima blew, the U.S. government decided to challenge Japanese recommendations, and they stated, the State Department claimed that the NRC recommendation was for 50 miles. 50 miles. And I tried to get some more information from the NRC. I've been scouring, and what I come up with is that they've always known that there's a possibility beyond the 10 or 15 miles. So if that is true, I would like to know why more isn't being done by Vermont Yankee or the NRC to educate people in this area and to think about that 50-mile area. NRC also stated in their miles of gobbledygook that they prepare for it internally once every 6 years.
Well,
so that's my other question, is once every 6 years. And I know this is not an earthquake zone, so some people may think it could never happen here, but I can tell you that the reactor in Fukushima is exactly the same age, and the people there never thought it could happen to them. The seismologists, the scientists, the government all thought that an accident of that magnitude was so beyond realm of statistical possibility that they could never even have to think about that. So, yeah, that's my question. My second question, sorry, but during times of emergency, I've noticed that the Swiss, the Austrians, the other citizens being shipped out of the country at government cost with lots of assistance. The State Department did charter some airplanes for people who wanted to get out, but we were told we had to sign an IOU and reimburse the government at market prices, which are like triple or quadruple what they are ordinarily, and we'd be dumped off in Bangkok or Taipei or someplace like that, and after that we would be on our own. So I also am kind of curious as to if there's anyone in the Congress or Senate who's looking after the needs of the Americans overseas, because I felt rather emotional about that.
Well, two things. One, nuclear safety, obviously, we're at the center of concern for that here. And of course, Entergy has done so many things to make us confident, right? Cooling tower falls down and they say it's not a big deal. The pipes are leaking and they say the pipes don't exist. They say even if they are leaking, there's no radioactive contamination and there's tritium. So your point here, I think everybody, especially in this area, agrees with you on.
I'm especially interested in emergency plans for that 50 miles.
Well, here's what we've done. I mean, I'm not going to be able to do. Senator Sanders and I have been meeting quite frequently with the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They have the legal authority, and as we painfully saw in Judge Murtha's decision, he thinks even talking about safety is not our right. Now that to me makes no sense whatsoever, since you live in the shadow of a nuclear power plant. But we're doing all we can to make the point you're making, that the NRC, since it does have the jurisdiction and the responsibility, they've got to do every single thing they can to prepare us and to be on the case to make certain that that nuclear reactor is operating properly and safe. And that would include things like evacuation zones and other things you're concerned about. I mean, bottom line, we know that if there's a nuclear event, that is a real disaster, okay? And you've expressed, I think, very well for all of us that concern. As far as the U.S. in taking folks who are Americans who were in the path of a disaster or an uprising or something, I actually didn't know what the procedures were, so I'll look into that when I get back to find out what I can. But I'm glad you made it back. Welcome home. Yes.
I have a question that really relates to it. Living here in this quote-unquote evacuation area, if an accident happens and if the houses are condemned, the nationwide or any insurance will not reimburse us. The federal government or NRC claims it's a federal matter. Who will reimburse us for the houses?
I don't know what the law is. Again, we can check on that.
That would be really good, because I mean, a lot of assets are tied up in the houses, and I so far could not get an answer. They say, oh well.
I don't know. Look, here's what I know. All right. we just got to be super vigilant and have the NRC on the job constantly to do everything that we have to do to make certain there isn't a disaster. I mean, you know, they'll be paying the price for this in Japan
And they're
for generations.
They're
you know?
arguing that point in Japan now. That
Yeah.
It's the power,
It is-
the power
it's just-
company.
Prentice?
I'm not 99% sure that the federal government is supposed to pay.
How long will
The
that
company and is not on the hook for that. But the federal government would reimburse people for the property,
I think
for the
you're
property
I think
values.
you're probably right.
And
But
unfortunately, if you look at what happened, like with Katrina and stuff, there would be no real, would not give you a lot of confidence you'd get a lot of money very quickly.
Yeah, and,
Right,
you
by
know,
that time I'm dead.
but the thing about it is if something really bad like that happened, you know, people are going to, you're losing your house, you're losing your livelihood. I mean, all kinds of really, really bad things happen. So obviously, there is the question you're asking. I think Prentice is probably right. But I think all of us want to be preoccupied with doing everything we possibly can to make certain that we're not subject to a nuclear event.
We're talking about money corrupting politics, and I'm really happy to hear you talking about that. But I do have a little bit of a bone to pick with you, and don't take this as not appreciating all of the other good work you've done, because I'm really happy to hear about the ethanol work that you did, which I didn't know about, and so forth. But one of the ways that we work around the problem of corporate overpowering the public voice is using the internet. And this is something that's been growing over time.
That's right.
Freedom of speech on the internet is a really big deal. And you probably recall that there was a big fuss about a law that was proposed in Congress that was pushed by the RA, the Recording Industry
The PIPA.
Association, SOPA and PIPA, yeah.
People know about that?
Yeah, so the reason I'm bringing this up is because that to me was an example where a very small group of corporations that actually participate in a very small way in our economy was trying to get a law passed that would have a tremendous effect on essentially every single citizen of the United States.
Right.
And I called your office many times in the months prior to the big internet blackout protest, trying to get somebody in your office to tell me what your position was on SOPA, particularly because that was the House of Representatives law. And the answer every single time I called was, "We don't know."
Yeah, that was right.
Yeah, but so the problem is that this is an ongoing thing, right? The RIA and the MPA have been pushing laws like this for many years.
I'll give you an answer on this. I mean, there's an absolutely important concern that you've expressed very well to keep the internet open, right? People want to do that. And just to mention the point, on the day that blackout, we had 2,000 calls and emails from Vermonters, and 1,995 were against the SOPA bill and 5 were for it, okay? Now, you asked the question, why didn't I have a position beforehand? I'm not on the committee. The committee was reviewing the law. And what they're trying to get a balance on in the draft that finally came forward, they hadn't achieved, was how, on the one hand, do you maintain open access to the internet, and on the other hand, respect intellectual property rights of artists, writers, and so on. No,
so I make my living.
No, let me just finish, because there are two interests here. I do believe that if an artist or an author has a product or a movie, a screenwriter, they're entitled to have that property right respected. Okay. And yet, I also believe that you have to have an open internet. Now, the bill that was in the process of being drafted on all of those times that you called me was a work in progress, and I was waiting to see what would be the final product that then I had to vote on. And that would be the type of thing where I'd have some interaction with folks like you saying, hey, what do you think, if they got it right or not? And when that bill finally came out, so that it was something concrete and not a moving target, then that's when I had something against which to decide yes or no.
So I'd just like to say something about the answer that you just gave me, though.
Okay.
I appreciate
Sure.
the difficulty of the situation that you're in when laws like this are proposed and you don't know exactly what you're going to get to vote on. But I make my living, I'm a computer programmer, I make my living selling copyrighted products. I need copyright protection,
Right.
but it's equally important that the copyright protection be targeted so that it achieves
Right.
the purpose that copyright is intended to achieve. And the fact is that over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, I have not had a problem with copyright. And most artists, most recording artists, most authors, even film producers will tell you that they don't have a really big problem. However, there are a couple of very large portions of the industry that feel that they do have a problem because they want to control how we consume the product that they produce. And so when I listen to the responses that I get from various politicians in Congress, the responses that I get seem utterly tone deaf. Again, I mean no offense. I understand that it's a complicated issue.
I don't take offense, but I disagree with you.
But
that there is a problem.
Well,
I talk to the recording artists. They lose access and control over their work.
Well, no, the thing is that there's actually no way to control that, right? You can't actually stop people from copying. It's technologically impossible. So when you pass a law, the stated purpose of which is to stop people from copying, the law can't achieve that purpose. It's literally impossible. However, the law can achieve many other purposes. And so what we're seeing is laws being proposed that achieve those other purposes, and the stated purpose for proposing the law is to protect the artist, but actually it doesn't protect the artist.
No, you've got a point. But one of the challenges with a, quote, law is that technology is moving so quickly, and you don't want to inhibit its advance and acceleration, that a law is going to be static and technology is dynamic. So you've always got a problem. But what you haven't addressed is the reality that there is some ripoff of intellectual property that is occurring. Now, you have raised the point that some of the remedies are worse than the disease, okay? But that doesn't mean it isn't a problem. That's what I'm saying. Because I have talked, especially to the recording artists, who, they're just, the whole industry has changed in significant part because they can't control it like they used to. So it is about property rights and control.
So they've lost something that they had before, which was granted to them by the people under the Constitution as an incentive for them to produce.
Well, that's where I do disagree with you. In other words, if somebody here writes a book, or you write the lyrics to a song, and you're entitled to compensation for the book you wrote, and you have a copyright, and then there's some way people get around it, and they make money off of the book you wrote or the song you wrote, and you get the money and the author doesn't. I don't think that's right. That's
I
what I'm
wrote a
saying.
book. I'm a published author. I wrote a book. It's actually the definitive text on the Internet Protocol that I happen to support. I've made a total of about $4,000 on that book over the course of the last decade. It's not a significant part of my income, which is not to say that authors don't make money or shouldn't make money, but the fact of the matter is the reason I wrote that book is because I wanted to get the information in the book out to people.
Right. That's
and
good.
So
you're
yes,
an open source kind of person.
Well, no, I mean we charge money for the book. It's a
All right, we got to move on a little bit here, but I'm not quite sure where the disagreement is. I'm saying that the internet's got to be open, but you also, I think, have to respect the product that's produced by an author.
Well, right, and we have a law that does that. There already is a law in the books that protects copyright. So the question is, should we have jackbooted thugs coming into people's houses, or should we have?
I am against jackbooted thugs coming into your house. Okay, you can go to the bank on that.
All right.
Or Prentice, and then.
I'm sort of curious as to why a lot of what's passed in Washington doesn't really take effect. A lot of what the stuff that's passed, important stuff that's passed, it gets kicked out further out into years. Budget stuff is like 10 years out in terms of budget, cutting the budget, or the health care law that was passed doesn't go into effect really until 2013 in a major way. So the stuff has like these 4-year gaps, and the public gets very frustrated because they want something to change in their lives. Legislation gets passed in 2009, but it doesn't go into effect until 2013.
You know what?
And the stuff is getting kicked down, so people get, I think the public is just generally like, so what was that all about? I mean, how does it affect my life?
Well, you've got a good point. I mean, you know, the healthcare law, I mean, there's some reasons there'd be transition, but some of it is basically a process of compromise that then creates a free fire zone for the next several years to fight on regulations. And that's happening in the healthcare bill, and it's happening in the Dodd-Frank financial services reform. You know, you compare that, I'll get the dates wrong, but it makes the point. When Medicare was passed, I think 1964, it was like passed in the summer and implemented in the fall. I mean, it just, you know, they passed the law and did it. It's like, we're serious. And what happened is that as long as it's not passed, the only thing you can argue about is whether it should be implemented. And once you get, if you're serious about it and you pass it, you ought to do it. And then energies get focused on making it work. So, I mean, I agree with you. And part of it, like I'll give the Dodd-Frank as an example. We made that so complicated when really a lot of the fundamental questions are quite simple. You know, should investment banks be able to invest money with taxpayer guarantees when the taxpayers are going to have to pick up the loss and the bank executives and shareholders were going to get the gains? And the answer to that, we all would agree, is no, right? So you go back to some of these basic principles of separating commercial banking, where there is depositor protection, versus investment banking, when they're, you know, they're playing with money. We shouldn't back that up. Well, if you just had a simple, clear statement of that, you wouldn't have to have a fight over all these regulations. So I think your point is right. The other thing is everybody knows that that's where all the lobbyists come in. You know, that's where, you know, this Dodd-Frank bill, just on this question of the Volcker rule, which is the separation of investment banking and commercial banking, that rule, which could be stated in a sentence, is now like 4,000 pages long. So I'm with you.
The money issue in politics. Occupy Wall Street obviously is fueled by a lot of forces, but certainly the big force behind the feeling about distribution of income in this country.
Right, right.
And when laws get passed concerning the environment, there have to be environmental impact studies. In a variety of ways, there has to be some analysis of what the impact of the act.
Right.
Is there any process in the Senate or the House that literally takes a piece of, let's say, restricted only to budget issues, I'm not talking about everything, budget issues, where a major change involved has to require that an impact statement be made in terms of its impact on the distribution of income in the country?
No.
I guess I'm saying is it would be awfully good if somehow or other, before our legislators vote on these issues, that they have a sense of what the impact is on.
Well, see, you're right, but see, here's the, you know, I compare my experience in Congress to my experience when I served in the state Senate. In the state Senate, the members of the committee, Republicans and Democrats, would have to spend time every day in the same room talking about the same problem. And over time, two things would happen. One, they'd get a common definition of what the problem is. So everybody was not entitled to make up their version of the facts, which is more or less what happens in Washington. Number two, over time they would come to respect one another. They'd start out going into that room. Richard, you remember how we did this in healthcare. You know, you'd go in with a point of view, and you'd be with the person who had a totally different point of view. But over time, as you started grappling with the reality and the constraints, you'd start to understand that even though this other person you disagreed with, you'd start to respect that they had the same interest in trying to make Vermont a better place that you did. And it would allow you to try to work in a way that made progress. Washington, we don't do that. You know, the committees don't meet enough. When they do, it's all kind of a rigged deal for political consumption. And you don't spend time together enough so that you get a common definition of what the problem is. So it's like theology. And the theology on one side is that if you lower taxes for people with wealth, they'll create jobs. Now, there's no factual basis to support that. But a lot of people believe it, and they assert it as though it's true. So if you said this will, ask for the study, they just will throw it out. They don't believe it. The most vivid example of that? No, I mean, this is unbelievable. This is the dysfunction of Congress. This whole question of contraception and whether that's preventive care that women can have access to, and then the question of the churches and the employer having to do it. In my view, the president worked out a reasonable compromise that it guaranteed that women would have access to contraception, and it was flexible on how it was delivered. Okay? And to me, that's reasonable. The committee I serve on, Oversight and Government Reform, instead of following a committee agenda and plan, suddenly jumped on this as the issue of the day. And the Republican majority had a hearing. It was entitled, "Is the Obama administration intent on squashing religious liberty in this country?" Right? That's the name of the hearing. Right? It gives you the idea. Maybe this is political. All right? And then, on this question of contraception, the witnesses they put together were 5 men. Right? It was like, oh, men. Like Earth to Congress. Get a clue. So when the institution functions that way, it's a problem for the American people.
For example, in the Senate, since the Democrats do have control, and they do have some say what the rules of procedure are, is there any reason the Democrats in the Senate couldn't make a recommendation or require, like an impact statement for environment, that a budget comes out and it has a major change, and it has some studies.
Don, I'm for it.
Would they have the capacity to do that if they had the will?
They would have the capacity in the majority, and they could ask the Congressional Budget Office to give an opinion as to how that will affect income distribution. Yeah, they could. Yeah, Richard.
Is there any effort underway to either make it legal or restrain the speculation in oil, so that people who don't actually use oil to sell it can't make the price go up?
Well, there is. And my legislation that I introduced is passed, but it's getting challenged in the Commodity Future Trading Commission, where Mr. Gensler, the head of that, is trying to implement rules, and the Republicans are trying to stop it from going into effect. But what Richard's talking about is, the price of gasoline, why is it so high? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is speculation. And the futures market was created to try to help what you call what the people who use it, the end users, like the fuel dealers here, like the airlines, like farmers with commodities, okay? And it used to be that 80% of the people who were in the futures market were the end users, and it was serving a very valid purpose to give them some stability in pricing, and to give them a market. They produce a crop today, they could sell it for a forward price. Well, it's been turned upside down. Wall Street sort of hijacked it. So instead of it being 80% end users and 20% market movers, it's 80% market players and 20% end users. And a study that Goldman Sachs did says that right now there's about $23 on the price of a $100 barrel of oil that's attributable to the speculation premium, and that translates into about 56 cents on a gallon of gas. So you fill up your pickup, it's going to be about an extra $15.
So would your bill make that illegal, or just change the
What
process?
it would do is allow the Commodity Future Trading Commission to do things like limit the number of positions that just the traders can get. If you're just a trader and not an end user, it would limit how many positions you could buy in the market, so that would tamp down the speculation. Number two, it would require that they put much more money down rather than borrow all this money to trade. So then that would curb it as well. And then third, it would open up the exchange so that there was much more public knowledge about what the positions were, and more transparency, which tends to curb the speculation premium. And that's something we really, really should do. And there's some Republicans who totally support that. I don't care you're a Republican or Democrat, and I don't care what district, red state, blue state, folks are getting hit hard by this price of gasoline, and of course in our state, home heating fuel. It's brutal.
Is there any hope in a Republican-controlled House to actually make that happen?
I don't think there's much hope in the Republican House, but there's a lot of there are Republicans who really do get it, and they care about, you know, they have the same reaction you and I have. So I'm going to keep pushing. Yes?
From my position here as a member of the town government, I would just articulate and emphasize that local funding issues, FEMA money,
right.
Highway money, community development block grants are things that obviously we need to be able to survive on a day-to-day basis. And I would encourage you to do what you can to try to keep those sources of funding open. I have a question that follows up on some of what I've heard you speaking about today. Based upon the time you've spent in Congress, do you think that there is the possibility that the dysfunction in Congress may abate in some way, and over the course of the time between now and the election, do you see a realistic possibility of any legislation that's going to come down and be adopted that's going to have a real direct impact here at home?
You ask whether it'll abate. I just have to wake up each day and go to work. All right? It's like, you know, in the Brooks house, you had that terrible fire, and you guys had an incredible response and put it out. And you had the winds blowing, and it wasn't clear that you were going to be able to save the structure at all. And then you go in there afterwards, and it's so awful to see people dispossessed, pushed out of their home, the water damage. I don't know whether that's worse than the fire damage. And it can be discouraging, but you know what? You just get up the next day and you put one foot in front of the other and you just keep plodding along. And you do it because that's what you do, not because you know that the outcome will be what you hope it'll be. You know that you won't have a chance of it being what you want it to be unless you put one foot in front of the other. So that's more or less my approach. As far as what we're going to do this year, it's a political year, but hope springs eternal. And you know, I've been making a little progress getting Republican interest in my energy conservation and energy efficiency legislation. You know, I traveled to the Middle East with Eric Cantor, who's the majority leader, and I actually established a pretty decent relationship with him when I was working on getting the FEMA funding out of the House. We had a real problem there. You know, Vermont is a small state. We have one representative in Congress. I'm not on a relevant committee, and I'm in the wrong party. You know, and we needed a lot of dough. So, you know, how are you going to do it? And what I did is I created the Irene Coalition in the House. We had 30 Democrats and 25 Republicans, and I just kept it really focused, narrow. Whenever I went to see Cantor, I'd bring a Republican, or when I went to see Boehner or Mr. Rogers, the head of the Appropriations Committee. You know, at the end of the process, it was, you know, just really trying to be cooperative and focused. They were asking us what we could, you know, how can we help you? And it worked out.
One of the local physicians, doctors here in Brattleboro. And I wanted to ask a question. Do you support primary care physicians, especially a group of
I love primary care physicians.
And
of
so
course.
What do you do, you know, to help them to survive in this?
Well, you know, that's a lot of what Vermont's trying to address with the single-payer healthcare plan, a recognition that primary care is really essential, and you've got to build that up. You know, the reimbursement system is upside down. There's a lot of compensation at the specialty level. The fee-for-service model encourages that, and we nickel and dime at the primary care level, not just with primary care physicians, but, you know, nurse practitioners, with just the maintenance and at the entry level health that you need. So yes, I do support primary care, but it's not so much I support primary care physicians. I support a healthcare system that provides primary care and preventive care, because that's a good medical model. And the folks that are on the front line, the primary care physicians, are the ones that get shortchanged, and it's creating, as you know, a shortage of for you to have the college you need to get the job done. But thank you. Yes.
My question isn't about local politics. It's about some perspective I'd like you to give about what is happening in Washington, helping keep us out of a conflict in Iran. That issue
Right.
would dwarf everything else we've been talking about today, large as those issues are.
Well, the question of Iran is enormously difficult. Here's what you have. Number one, you have an Iranian state that's apparently trying to develop a nuclear bomb. That's a bad thing. It's destabilizing. The world would be a better place if they don't have a bomb. All right? Iran does have a history of being very interventionist and negative and intervening in politics in other countries. They're big supporters of Syria. They've sent explosives to Afghanistan to kill our troops. They export their view of the world through Hezbollah. There's a lot of bad things that Iran does. So it's definitely, in my view, worth it for us to try to, in cooperation with others, to have Iran not have a nuclear weapon. Okay? What we're doing right now, of course, is trying to pursue that diplomatically and through very aggressive sanctions. And the sanctions are very much supported by the Arab League. That's important, as well as the European Union. And the indicators are that they're having some significant impact. Now, one of the challenges is that when you have a situation where you're not certain what the outcome is going to be, many people, in the desire to have a definitive outcome, mistakenly think a military option will get the job done. And I think you're hearing a lot of that right now. And on this trip that I took with Mr. Cantor, where we went to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, all of those countries were very much supportive of very aggressive sanctions. They're all opposed to Iran having a nuclear weapon. But they were extremely cautious and sober about the implications of a military attack. Because they're going to be on the receiving end of anything that happens once that occurs. So, as with all of these things, all the options are, quote, on the table. But we've had experience with what happens when we unleash the wrath of war. Look at what's happened in Iraq. Look what's happened in Afghanistan. It didn't exactly work out the way a lot of folks thought it would. So I share your concern. And my view is that the Obama administration is handling this pretty well. This is the type of thing that can't be micromanaged in Congress. Because what tends to happen in Congress is that there is a rhetorical glide path of escalation. And what you want is some sober, steady leadership on this. And I think the Obama administration has been doing a pretty good job. But how this is going to work out, we don't know. But your concern is one I share.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Seething inside over this nuclear issue, especially with the state of Vermont. Its rights were going to supersede that of energy. And my comment, all I'd like to do is comment on this, is that in The Art of War, the author says that the best way to defeat your enemy is to turn his weakness against him. And this Tea Party movement that has been growing pretty rapidly has run on a platform of pretty strong advocate, as a strong advocate for states' rights. And I guess I was just stunned when the Murtha found in favor of energy that nobody in the Democratic Party, especially you and our senators, didn't call upon the Tea Party to come to our rescue and stand up for states' rights, which I thought would have been a really unique way of getting them to stand for what they believe in, at the same time slap them around for having to support a democratic regime when they're clearly against everything we stand for. I wonder why we didn't use that as an opportunity.
I mean, there's kind of two parts to it. The Tea Party will do what it wants. They don't need to hear from Senator Lady Sanders and me about, quote, what they should do. They have their own ability to assess that decision or any other action. But number two, I found the Murtha decision very troubling. I was in the legislature when we were considering that. And if you live here, how can you not be concerned about safety, right? Now, you may not have the authority to do anything about it because the law, federal law, says that's up to the NRC. But the fact that you don't have any legal right to do anything about it doesn't mean you don't have the human right to be concerned about it. And if you're concerned about it, you talk about it. And the question, what I thought was the fundamental failure of the Murtha decision was that while, yes, some legislators talked about safety, since they represent, by the way, you, and that's your concern, do they have an independent legal basis to make the decision they made? And there's all kinds of other legal bases for them to do that. Vermont wants to be in charge of its energy future. Does it want to move towards alternative energy or clean energy as opposed to double down on nuclear energy? That's a fair question for the state to ask. You know, what's our energy mix and how is it going to fit into our economic future? Those are legitimate concerns. So where the legislature clearly had legal bases upon which to make its decision, the fact that some members of the legislature expressed the human concern about the safety of the people they represent, how in the world does that disqualify the legislature from representing you and making the decision it made? So I just found this a very, very troubling decision on his part. Yes?
This is a question with regard to jobs. It's very clear that jobs are not going to come back to the United States. There aren't manufacturing jobs any longer. This has all been replaced by technology. What used to take 100 people now takes 1 or 2.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? You know, we can't just all be computer programmers. We can't all be financiers. How is this country going to survive without a way to employ all of its people?
It's the $64 question. Here's what I think. Number one, there clearly is a change because of technology. It's almost like going back to when agriculture was affected by technology. And, you know, we had, I'll get the percentage wrong, but, you know, you had like 60 or 70% of America involved in agriculture, and then it became 2%. And that was a lot of dislocation. And then eventually we got into manufacturing, and a lot of folks who used to be on the farm went into manufacturing. And now with technology, a lot of folks who were in manufacturing are looking for where that takes place. So there's a legitimate challenge. It's a real problem, not subject to a quick and easy answer.
I understand.
But no, I know you do. But on the other hand, there are things that we can do. Like, for instance, a lot of us really do believe that if we embraced the opportunities of a clean energy economy, that we would be allowed to create jobs. A lot of us think that if we put money into making our buildings, homes and commercial buildings more energy efficient, that's money saved. All those folks out of work in the home construction building field would have some work to do. 95% of the products are manufactured in America, and manufacturing's down, but you know, there's some signs of revival, and the competitive advantages around the world are starting to diminish. Our tax policies obviously make a difference. You know, we've got tax policies where what's happened with the financial sector, we need a strong financial sector. We need banks to have an economy. But traditionally, when I grew up, the banks, the financial sector was in service of the productive economy. Wall Street sort of turned it upside down. The productive economy is in service of the investment banks. And you know, you look at the difference between the banks in Vermont and the community banks around the country and the Wall Street investment houses. You know, if our local banks were running the show, we wouldn't have had Lehman Brothers collapse. We wouldn't have had that Wall Street collapse, all right? So, you know, we've got to get back to some balance here. And then you have to have tax policies where you're not hammering wages and salaries and giving a big break, earned income, and giving just a real fat break to, you know, the carried interest that allowed Mr. Romney to pay, what, 13%. It's a tax rate when, as Warren Buffett says, you know, his secretary pays twice that rate. So there's a lot of things we can do. Yeah.
China is a big issue for the future of this country in terms of the jobs that we've lost. And changing our tax code in terms of earned income versus unearned income isn't going to deal with that.
Right.
How do we get the companies who continue to move their manufacturing facilities to China to bring them back here, or make it such a disadvantage to move over there that they never do?
Again, you guys are asking hard questions.
Well, Jeff,
No easy ride down here in Brattleboro.
GE has said that you cannot make money.
See, I think on some of the major parts that get, the commodity parts will migrate to where the labor is the cheapest. And I don't know that there's much anybody can do policy-wise to change that. And where? Well, that's true. You could do that. I don't know that there's much support for that. And you know, that gets into
as much to buy a product made in China as if it were made in the United States.
No, you could do that, but that would have you know, you're setting off a trade war and there's other collateral consequences.
How about just requiring that they be paid equal wages or pay a tariff?
I don't think we have that kind of control.
Well, the point is,
in the trade agreements, I think we've done a bad deal on these trade agreements. But our ability to quote make China or make Vietnam or make Thailand pay a wage we tell them to pay, we don't have the ability to do that. What we do have the ability to do is not enter into bad trade agreements. Okay, but you know, we just came from the
Vermont circuit.
Yeah, Vermont circuits, and they, you know, it's amazing. They make circuit boards, and some of these circuit boards are commodities, and most of that they were explaining to us has been shipped to where the labor is the cheapest. But on the other hand, the value added, and the high tech, and the intellectual property component of this was allowing them to make some higher end circuit boards. And you know, they've got what, 80 people or so working up there right here in Brattleboro. And one of their challenges is getting more folks who are here to work. They actually train the workers. So we've got kind of a workforce challenge that is part of the problem as well. Yes.
There are manufacturers that are that have proven. There was just a story on CBS about this company in Ohio that had reworked how they made their product, and then were able to figure out how to make it here. The only thing they say that they can't compete with is the labor. So they figured out how to reduce the labor enough so that they could manufacture it here. But it's now cheaper to make it here than it is to make it over in China.
That's right.
And they're making a better quality product, they feel, because they wanted more quality control. So, you know, what about providing some way to provide support for manufacturers who want to try to do that, to be able to figure out how to bring the manufacturing of the product over here?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And you know, just here at Vermont Circuits, I heard from them a couple of things that made me feel good about the state of Vermont. One, Vermont has this lean manufacturing program, and a manufacturer can invite the folks from that program to come in, and they actually pay part of it. The state pays part of it, but it helps them reorganize their production processes so they're as efficient as possible. And I hadn't spent much time in factories before I got elected to Congress. But I've spent a lot of time since I have. It's really astonishing how skillful people are about making a complicated process simple so that you can do it as efficient as possible. In Vermont, the state government's helping a lot, and I know Governor Shumlin is very committed to that. The second thing is training. They've helped with training. So there are things we can do, and we should do it. Yes, sir.
I was wondering your opinion on the effect of the Postal Service closing the White River Junction plant and abandoning overnight delivery for, I guess, rural Vermont.
It's bad.
All our processing for southern Vermont will be done in New Hampshire now.
It's bad. You know, Lawrence Miller, who's our Commissioner of Economic Development and has a successful history in business himself, at the meeting we had up in White River, I don't know if you were there.
I've heard.
Yeah, but he pointed out that a lot of our businesses do depend on that overnight delivery, and they depend on the post office to be able to get their job done. Now we know the Postal Service has real challenges. You know, it's a new world with the internet, and first-class mail is down, and they have to make some adjustments in the process of doing it. But we burden them. They have a pension system where the payments are required to be more than is what actuarially is necessary to fund it. So, you know, you can overfund or you can underfund, and they're overfunding, so that accounts for some of the deficit. Secondly, you've got to recognize that the Postal Service has always had the challenge of having to deliver everywhere, rural routes that aren't, quote, profitable. And there's got to be some allowance made for that. So I think it's a bad thing for Vermont to have that facility closed. It's going to be tough, obviously, on people and the loss of jobs. Our jobs are starting to come back in the country, but they're coming down in the public sector. And the public sector has become a whipping boy or girl for everybody. But bottom line, a lot of the stuff that is done at the local community does depend on having people in public sector jobs, post office among them.
Perhaps, was your meeting with President Brattleboro in Haiti anything more than a meet and greet?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. Okay? I was in Haiti 10 months ago, and I was in Haiti 10 days ago, whatever. Has anybody here been to Haiti? I mean, you just know the suffering there is unbelievable. But 10 months ago when I was there, when we were coming in from the airport, how recently have you been there?
Last year, I traveled there every 3 months. I worked in an agroforestry program in the Northwest.
Well, I mean, you can answer, you can talk about this, I'm sure, better than I can. But here's what I noticed. One is that on that drive-in from the airport, 10 months ago, you barely could get through the street because everywhere from the airport in were these 10 cities. And they were just really difficult places. People had no place to live, and they were spilling over into the street so that you barely could get from the airport into the center city. The second thing is when I was there, they didn't have a new government yet. And one of the experiences that I found really depressing is we went up to the Prime Minister's residence, and nothing was going on. It was like nothing was going on. And you look out, and it was, it would be like nothing is going on in Vermont after Hurricane Irene, right? And everything was going on in Vermont. Select board members who knew somebody with a backhoe was calling them up and saying, hey, we need you down here. All kinds of activity.
There wasn't any now the election to the appointed Prime Minister has been.
Right, but what I was going to say is that I noticed a real difference in the 10 months. On the ride-in on the airport, most of those 10 cities had been evacuated, which means that those people had been given, they had homes. They were, and this is something President Martelli was quite proud of, and rightly so. And they were not in those 10 cities. They had a place to go. They had a habitation, nothing fancy. But they had a lot of the rubble that we saw before. I mean, the massive amounts of rubble in Haiti, all these buildings collapsed, and it's just concrete and rubble. The challenge of just trying to remove it, as you know, was enormous, and a lot of that I had seen where it was before was gone. And then also, President Martelli does have a lot of energy, and what you had a sense of was that they had a functioning government. He had, he's got his challenges. The Prime Minister, as you mentioned, resigned. He felt that it actually was a good thing because the way their government works, there's got to be a little more cooperation between the President and the Prime Minister, and there wasn't. So he's going to appoint another person and hopes that that'll be better. So it was more upbeat. Now, how is that relevant? It's relevant because actually our taxpayer dollars in aid has been somewhat helpful to Haiti. And the more confidence we have that money is going to be wisely used to help folks get relocated, to get rubble removed, to get them back on their feet, the better. And Senator Leahy, of course, is the chair of the subcommittee on foreign aid. Okay, so he's got a very, very important position in the Congress. And having him get a firsthand view of what's going on and come back with some confidence, I think will be helpful to him in his decisions.
My reason for asking is my particular focus right now, apart from the work that I do in Haiti, is there's a huge maquiladora complex being built in the northeast part of the country, along with plans for 5 or 6 other similar enterprises, and it's all funded by a mixture of IMF, USAID, Clinton money, and the problem is that the housing that is concomitant with being built is totally inappropriate. It's environmentally, public health perspective-wise. It's not suitable for the influx of people that are supposed to be living there. And we are trying to put a stop to the construction. Other considerations are the water that is proposed to be drawn out of the local aquifer. There are no plans for, or adequate plans for recycling or for purifying once it's been toxified by the dyeing process. And the whole larger perspective of yet another commercial export-based program that does not, that may be one element in the total reconstruction of any country, but it's, my word for it is demonic, because it's inappropriate.
Yeah, you know way more than I know about that.
Oh, okay. We've been barraging, giving research, lots of background information.
Well, he's the person to talk to. All right, last question.
Not a question, just a comment. I've read about your bipartisan breakfast group.
Yeah.
I want to commend you for making that effort, futile as it may seem. I think it's worth the effort, and you're doing good work.
Thank you. But it's not the bipartisanship isn't just to be a quote good guy. It's like you can't get anything done unless you do it together. You just can't. That's all there is to it. And in Vermont, we're used to that. Bob Gannett, who many of you may have known, when I first went to the Senate in 1981, he was a leader, and I was in the minority. And I'd won an upset election. I won, it was the Reagan year, and I went up in Windsor County. And a lot of times you get marginalized when you're the sort of the new kid on the block. And Bob Gannett figured I had some energy, wanted to help, gave me a chance, put me on the Finance Committee, and you know what? It made all the difference. It's like, hey, you're going to give me a shot. So I wanted to be a contributor. You know what I mean? It's more fun getting things done than it is just, being thrown sand in the wheels. And somehow, some way, the way we do things here in Vermont, we've got to get that more into Congress, I think. Anyway, thank you all very much.